So it seems like when you got your diagnosis, you did the opposite of going into your room and not coming out. Is that the case?
Just the opposite. Well, I talk in the play and I talk about my life. I started troublemaker. I had a background. I worked in, very visible, very visible. Even as I started working, doing the Ralph Nader work in public, I had taught a couple of things, and still probably nice today. If you're starting in a new field and you're trying to be an advocate, raise your hand, be noticed, talk. And, like I said, at 14, I'm down at the city council meeting telling them that their curfew is unconstitutional. And I always had that personality. I've been loud a bit. I've done that a couple of times. I don't know if I need to go. A couple of times in my life where I'm all of a sudden the loudest guy in the room. And often that way they handle it is, all right, you be president of the board, or you take on that task. So, and when I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I had been doing the play about Susan, about being the care partner. And so I had developed a theatrical cohort, I call them. There's this big conference every January in New York. They usually don't have people like, again, I went to it every year for about 5 years. I had other actors who knew my work, knew my play. I started telling people that my first diagnosis was mild cognitive impairment, known as MCI. And that was in 2018, but until 2022 that I got the Alzheimer's, why I was mildly cognitively impaired, because I had early stage Alzheimer's. And they were telling me, write about it, take it, put it on the page and on the stage. That's what actors do, particularly solo actors. It didn't register at first, and mild cognitive impairment wasn't all that bad. It explained a few things of what was going on. The Alzheimer's was a little bit harder. It took a minute. We have 2 adult children. Of course, I love to say one's a lawyer and a legislator now, but one's a lawyer. The other one, therefore, has to be of course, she's a pediatric dentist, a doctor. And we talked to our children, and, I guess I didn't know what else to do. In some ways, I didn't want, and I had the experience of writing about an existential matter. I mentioned I was working with I worked part-time in New York every other week. It was with a social justice ministry, a nice Jewish boy. But I went and worked with the social justice ministry of the Collegiate Church of New York, the oldest church in America. And a friend had taken it over. And we were using theater and art and music around social change. And I had experienced and saw, and I still believe now, and now I believe, people can be persuaded by emotion more than theory. You can write this policy paper and send it to somebody and they'll read it. But if you can give them an opera or a show or something that hits them in their heart, they'll think differently, or they'll maybe reconsider. And so I had seen that and done that. I had this encouragement, and I had people I'd worked with about the other play, and it wasn't again obvious to me. But I'm learning now. I've entered the whole universe of people with cognitive decline, cognitive impairment. The baby boomer generation and their children. It's huge that are confronting cognitive or just late in life diseases. And we're living with the Dr. Alzheimer's narrative. And people don't know what that is. It's almost a Frankenstein idea of what somebody would, reminded when growing up, cancer wasn't mentioned as a word. It was the C word. Now we have this terrible word, dementia, and it is based on the idea that there's sort of this late stage version of the disease, of the person sitting in a nursing home with a kind of look on their face. And that is late stage. My neurologist, when I got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, said it could be 5 to 10, maybe even 15 years before I got a lot worse. I'm 7 years into it, and I'm beginning to feel it more. I know a clock is ticking, but there are so many of us in these earlier stages. And if I have anything I want to do, it's possible to live a meaningful, purposeful life with this disease. And then you may know there's a counter narrative. And I feel like I'm just talking about it.
That's what you're here for.
But one of my motives actually was I was exercising one day listening to a podcast, maybe like a good podcast. But the guest was a person who'd written a book. I'm not going to give them credit. I don't like to talk. But the book was about how this woman's husband was diagnosed with early stage Alzheimer's, my diagnosis. And she quotes him as saying, "I don't want to die, but I don't want to continue to become a lesser and lesser person." And the rest of the book, it was how hard it was for them to get to Switzerland so he could kill himself with poison. And there is a narrative in support of that choice. And I want to be the opposite voice, that life with this disease is worth living, that we can still continue to lead a meaningful, useful life and do things. And there's a whole new movement. I've just learned this, and I'm making connections with them in senior living homes and in senior living around the Montessori method. And it's like, oh, I thought that was for grade school kids in the rich side of the house. And Montessori, which I did not understand, is about working with people. In this instance, in grade schools and schools, it's see a child's natural inclinations and work with that. Lead with, if they're a good typist or if they're a good actor or if they athletic, teach them through that and let them develop their own strengths. They're beginning to apply that idea to people with dementia, with cognitive decline. I was talking to somebody on a podcast, my own podcast with somebody, and they were joking because they were familiar with this. They said, "Well, if you came to our place, we would put you in charge of the drama club in the memory unit. They would have a drama club, even for those." And so what I hope I can be part of is helping people reimagine this journey, even with cognitive issues. So that's sort of my story at the moment, what I'm trying to do. You're on the West Coast, but your podcast is everywhere, right?
Yes. Yeah. We're, I think, on almost every continent. One or two people, but yeah.
Are you familiar with there's a big conference coming up in April in Florida called On Aging?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm going to be there. That's what I mentioned. Maybe people here, I had never heard of it. It's called On Aging, and I have a room April 20th at 5:00. If anybody who listens is going to be at the On Aging conference, come say hello. But that's more. This is what's happening to America, and so it's a huge cohort of. And I want to be part of this movement that you can live even in impaired ways, even as your own health changes. I don't like the word deteriorates, changes. And you can find joy, you can find meaning, you can find purpose, you can help each other. You can be in a drama club and have maybe even mid-stage Alzheimer's. But anyway, so that's my energy. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, we don't ever hear of people talking about middle stage Alzheimer's. I just realized that. It's like either early stage or late stage. There's never talk about the middle stage. And
it is a process. And it is a process. It can change quickly sometimes, and sometimes it's slow. There's a consensus right now with my wife and my neurologist that my doing this work is slowing down the progress. That my energy and working at this, by the way, I was looking to see if I had it. I don't have it with me. I carry the script in my hand, but I can't memorize. I memorized the first play. I would boom, 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 an hour play, memorize. That was no problem. And in fact, one of the symptoms during the pandemic, I was still doing the other play, the actual dance, but I was doing it from home now. Had my phone and I was able to perform over Zoom for a lot of the breast cancer clubs around the country, Gilda's clubs. And it was actually fortunate by Susan, my wife would sit on the side. She would have the script, but usually that wasn't an issue. But I started missing my lines, forgetting lines. So she could cue me out from the side. Now, even though I carried the script on stage, so I refer to it more than I think when I see videos of me on stage when it's done. So I'm looking down too much. But anyway, so now Susan carries the script and sits in the first row. I call her my cognitive navigator.